Thank you, Program Director, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, nationals of the land of the brave, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Bongani Sayidini. I'm a petroleum engineer with 22 years of experience in the oil and gas sector, so I am not that young. I work for the Petroleum Agency of South Africa, and the Petroleum Agency of South Africa is the regulator of the upstream petroleum sector in South Africa. It assesses the prospectivity of the country in terms of petroleum prospectivity. It ensures compliance of operators in terms of their work programs associated with the petroleum rights, and it also must promote the oil and gas sector in South Africa. Our presentation as the Petroleum Agency covers the legal framework governing South Africa's social and labor plan, the human resources development requirements of the social and labor plan, building capacity through the upstream training trust, leveraging the social and labor plan to develop local educational infrastructure, and then we conclude. The social and labor plan is a requirement in terms of production rights in South Africa. So once you've done your exploration, you've made discoveries, you've been awarded a production right, you are now ready to develop and produce, then there is a requirement to have a social and labor plan. And it is provided for in terms of the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Act of 2002, which is the principal legislation governing oil and gas exploration and production in South Africa. It is also provided for in terms of the broad-based socio-economic empowerment charter for the mining and minerals industry of 2018, as well as the upstream petroleum resources development bill of 2021, which is a bill that is once that bill is enacted. The bill is currently before Parliament, and that bill essentially is a separation of oil and gas, or of the regulation of oil and gas from that of minerals, because the current law is a combination of both hard rock minerals as well as oil and gas, which is more fluid mineral resource. So the objects of the SLP in terms of the MPRDA is to ensure equitable access to the nation's petroleum resources by South Africans. It's the substantial and meaningful expansion of opportunities and benefits for historically disadvantaged South Africans. And this includes women of all colors, as they too were historically disadvantaged in South Africa, and I would say even globally. Women have had to bear the brunt of us men. So that's their meaningful participation across the petroleum value chain. It is economic growth and petroleum resources development in South Africa. It is the employment of and advancement of the socio-economic welfare of South Africans, as well as to ensure that production right holders contribute to the socio-economic development of the areas in which they operate, as well as their labor-sending areas. In terms of the applicability of the social and labor plan, is to ensure the effective transformation And to ensure the effective transformation, the MPRDA requires the submission of the SLP as a prerequisite for the granting of a production right or a license. It is formulated in consultation with the local communities, the local municipality, as well as all other relevant stakeholders. So it's quite critical that that social and labor plan has the input or is owned by the local communities. It's valid until the cessation of operations, or at least until there is a closure certificate related to such operations. And the SLP is also, it's reviewed every 5 years. And holders of production rights are required to report on compliance with the social and labor plan and the charter for minerals and mining industry annually. Key elements of the social and labor plan is a comprehensive human resources development programs. It's host community or local economic development projects in line with an integrated development plan of the relevant local municipality and community needs. It's procurement and enterprise development. It's housing and living conditions plan for employees on site, as well as measures to manage downscaling and retrenchments to minimize the impact of cessation of operations. The actual human resources development program associated with the social and labor plan is to the objectives thereof to ensure the development of the core and critical skills required to support the upstream petroleum industry. So here we talk of core skills being geosciences, for example, petroleum engineering, and so on. Is to promote employment equity, targeting at least 40% participation by historically disadvantaged South Africans across all levels of management, with a 10% women target. And I think that is a very low target that should be revised such that that target should be 50-50 between men and women leading entities or at management level. And these objectives can be achieved through tailored skills development and training programs, through bursary schemes, through learnerships and artisanal training, through internships, as well as career progression and mentoring programs aimed at historically disadvantaged South Africans. I think this concept of historically disadvantaged South Africans is well known in this room. It really relates to the fact that colonialism in South Africa was of a special type. Now, there is capacity building through what we call the Upstream Training Trust. I think it's the equivalent of the Petro Fund in Namibia. So this Upstream Training Trust was established in 1997 by the Petroleum Agency SA together with the upstream operators. So South Africa has had production in terms of oil and gas production for at least 30 years, starting in 1992. The history of the search for oil and gas in the country goes back. I think the formation of the establishment of the then exploration company of the state was in 1965, but that followed exploration efforts by the Geological Survey of South Africa, even in the 1940s. So South Africa has had a long history of exploration for oil and gas but actual production being in 1992 all the way to 2020. So there's a history there. So 1997, this would have been 5 years after first gas, which was beneficiated locally through the building of a gas-to-liquids refinery in a town called Mossel Bay, some 400 kilometers from Cape Town. And that gas, which has been converted to produce liquid fuels, petrol, diesel, paraffin, liquefied petroleum gas, was produced for 28 years until 2020, and that refinery remains there and is still operational, albeit heavy depleted gas reserves. So the UTT is a public benefit organization governed by a trust, deed, and is registered. And petroleum right holders in the country pay an annual fee towards skills development for the sector as a license condition. And those fees are then allocated to the UTT. And that training trust is actually administered by us as the Petroleum Agency of South Africa. Its mission, the UTT's mission, is to work with the upstream petroleum sector and other partners to help South Africans from disadvantaged backgrounds acquire the skills, experience, and expertise to find decent employment in the upstream petroleum industry. Over the last 10 years, about 362 students received full bursaries from the UTT for studies in the geosciences, that's geology, geophysics, geochemistry, to some respects, specializations in petrophysics and so on, environmental science, engineering, computer science, and related fields. This is what the breakdown in terms of the 362 students that were funded, all at local universities. So you'll find that figure there is a fairly low figure of 28 million, but that is funding 362 students at local South African universities. There's been, of course, more other efforts to build skills where people were sent overseas to acquire skills, these core skills. I'm one of those that was sent overseas to study petroleum engineering, for example. So much more money was used towards that end. This is just monies invested in terms of local universities. So 28 million over the last 10 years. UTT also funds what we call STEM projects, like science, technology, economics, and or is it engineering? Okay, engineering, thanks. So UTT also funds those projects. Over the last 10 years, it's funded to the tune of 23